Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. Today we're embarking on a monumental journey, a truly extensive and deeply immersive exploration into one of the most transformative periods in the entire sweep of human history, the Industrial Revolution. This wasn't merely a collection of isolated new machines or a series of technological advancements confined to workshops and factories. It was a fundamental, systemic, and utterly relentless reshaping of societies, economies, daily life, and, indeed, the very fabric of human existence across the globe, initiating changes whose profound and multifaceted echoes are still felt in every facet of our world today, defining the very contours of modernity itself. We will meticulously trace the path from the quiet, seemingly immutable agrarian villages of the mid-18th century, where life had seemingly remained unchanged in its ancient rhythms for countless generations, where the rhythm of the seasons dictated everything, to the bustling, smoke-filled, and utterly dynamic, often chaotic, sprawling cities of the 19th, where humanity experienced an acceleration of change so profound, so rapid, and so unprecedented that it was unlike anything witnessed before or since in recorded history. We will delve into the ingenious inventions that sparked this era, the profound social shifts they engendered, the immense triumphs of human ingenuity, relentless enterprise, and collaborative effort that built this new industrial world, and, critically, the undeniable, often harrowing hardships, injustices, and suffering that characterized this period for millions upon millions of people, caught in its relentless, unforgiving gears. It's a complex and multi-layered story of innovation and invention, human resilience in the face of immense and disruptive change, relentless progress, and its often unforeseen consequences, the sometimes brutal realities of unprecedented transformation, and the enduring struggle for social justice in the face of stark new economic realities and immense concentrated inequality. Before we fully immerse ourselves in this fascinating, complex, and sometimes sobering period of history, a period that laid the very foundations for our contemporary world and continues to shape our present, I'd love to connect with all of you watching and listening right now. How's your day going so far, wherever you are in the world, whatever you might be doing, perhaps whether you're commuting, working, or relaxing? I genuinely hope it's treating you well, perhaps offering moments of calm, productivity, or at the very least, that you're finding a spark of interest and engagement in our discussion today. As a little moment of reflection and connection, a chance to hear from you directly, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment right now to pause, consider, and then comment below to share just one goal you have for the future. It could be something grand and ambitious, a significant career milestone you're striving for, a personal development aspiration you hold dear, a skill you want to master, or even a small, seemingly simple step you plan to take tomorrow to improve your day or your life. It's always incredibly inspiring and motivating for me to hear about what drives people, what you're working towards, and the dreams and aspirations you hold, big or small. Your unique perspectives and goals truly enrich our community here. And of course, if you enjoy this kind of in-depth historical exploration, if you appreciate the level of detail, the extensive research, and the comprehensive nature of this content, and want to see more long-form comprehensive videos like this that dive deep into pivotal moments of the past, please consider hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications so you don't miss future uploads. Your support truly, profoundly helps the channel grow, allows me to dedicate more time and resources to researching and producing these meticulously detailed videos, and genuinely encourages me to keep digging deeper into the vast and intricate tapestry of the past, bringing these compelling stories to life for you, our dedicated audience. Thank you so much for being here, for your engagement, and for your continued support, which makes all of this possible. Now, let's begin our journey back in time not just to a different historical era, but to a world vastly, almost unrecognizably different from our own present day. Imagine, if you will, the mid-18th century, a time before the pervasive rhythmic rumble of the steam engine or the insistent mechanical clatter of the power loom began to redefine human existence. For millennia, perhaps even since the dawn of settled agriculture, thousands of years prior, human existence had been primarily defined by the unyielding rhythm of the seasons and the unwavering, often arduous, demands of the land. Life was overwhelmingly agrarian, meaning it was centered around farming, the meticulous cultivation of crops, and the diligent raising of livestock. The vast majority of people, easily 80% or even 90% of the population of Great Britain, lived in rural areas, dwelling in small, scattered villages, isolated hamlets, and remote farmsteads. Their daily lives were dictated by the rising and setting of the sun, by the specific and often punishing cycles of planting, tending, and harvesting crops, by the demanding tasks of caring for livestock, and by performing manual labor that often involved every single member of the family unit, from the youngest child capable of pulling weeds or minding animals to the eldest grandparent offering their wisdom and experience in traditional practices, all contributing to the household economy. These villages and farmsteads were largely self-sufficient economic units, meaning they produced most of what they consumed locally, from the grains, vegetables, and meat that sustained them to the simple wool or linen clothing they spun and wove, and the basic tools they utilized for their craft. Markets were predominantly localized, serving only a small radius of a few miles around a central market town, and trade beyond these immediate boundaries was limited, agonizingly slow, and inherently expensive, relying on rudimentary, arduous transportation methods like pack animals traversing uneven, often muddy and rutted tracks, or slow-moving barges navigating sometimes shallow rivers, perpetually susceptible to seasonal changes, droughts, or freezing conditions. The production of goods in this pre-industrial world was a painstakingly slow, highly individualized, and often inefficient process, fundamentally limited by human and animal muscle power, and the crudeness of available tools. Most manufacturing, if we can even apply that modern term, given its limited scale and fragmented nature, happened in people's own homes or in small specialized craft workshops through what was then known as the cottage industry, or the putting out system. This system operated like this. A merchant or capitalist, typically based in a town, would put out raw materials such as raw wool, flax, or sometimes cotton, to rural families, often during the long winter months when agricultural work slowed down, providing a crucial supplementary income for the household. Within these homes, women and children would meticulously clean, card, and spin raw fibers into thread using simple spinning wheels, while men would weave that thread into cloth on hand looms, all working at their own pace, within their own family unit, often alongside their hearths. The finished products would then be collected by the merchant, who would pay them by the piece, often a meager sum that reflected the low value of their fragmented labor and the distance of the supply chain. It was an inherently laborious process, highly susceptible to weather conditions affecting raw materials, family illnesses, or personal whims, and the overall output was inherently limited by human hands, simple, often inefficient tools, and the sheer number of hours a family could dedicate to the task, leading to unpredictable supply. There was little to no standardization in quality, and consistency varied widely from one household to another, making large-scale, uniform production or consistent quality control virtually impossible, thus limiting market reach and consumer confidence. Communication across distances was equally slow and unreliable, often relying on messengers on horseback or word of mouth, meaning vital news or crucial market information could take weeks or even months to travel across regions, let alone across continents, hindering rapid business decisions. The pace of life, by our modern standards, was excruciatingly slow, deliberate, and deeply connected to the natural world and the rhythms of agriculture. Everything was localized, personal, profoundly connected to the immediate environment, and profoundly interconnected with the rhythms of nature and the vagaries of the weather, a world far removed from the instantaneity and scale of our own. But beneath this seemingly static and unchanging surface, powerful, almost imperceptible, transformative forces were already at play, gathering momentum and converging, particularly within the island nation of Great Britain. That would act as the crucial preconditions, the very fertile ground, for the monumental economic and social shift about to occur. One of the most significant and often overlooked of these foundational changes was the agricultural revolution. This wasn't a sudden, cataclysmic event, but rather a gradual, sustained series of innovations, careful scientific experiments, and fundamental changes in farming practices that profoundly increased food production and, critically, freed up a significant portion of the rural population from direct, intensive agricultural labor. Consider the numerous innovations that gradually transformed the British countryside. The widespread adoption of the Norfolk four-course rotation system, for instance, was truly revolutionary for soil management and sustained productivity. Farmers discovered that by systematically rotating specific crops like wheat for bread, turnips for fodder, barley for brewing, and clover for fodder and soil enrichment over a meticulous 4-year cycle, they not only prevented soil exhaustion, a chronic problem in older single-crop or fallow-field systems, but actually dramatically improved soil fertility, especially with the nitrogen-fixing properties of clover and the nutrient return from root crops, like turnips. Turnips and clover were particularly revolutionary because they could be grown as fodder crops, meaning they provided a continuous, abundant source of feed for livestock during the lean winter months, which had previously been a major challenge, often necessitating the slaughter of animals due to lack of feed. This allowed farmers to keep more livestock year-round, leading to healthier, larger animals that could be sustained through the winter, producing more meat, more dairy products, and, crucially, more manure for fertilizer, further boosting crop yields and creating a powerful, self-reinforcing virtuous cycle of agricultural improvement. New tools and specialized techniques also emerged, seemingly small innovations that had enormous cumulative impact on efficiency and overall output. Jethro Tull's seed drill, invented in 1701, might appear as a minor device in the grand scheme of things, a mere agricultural implement, but its impact on efficiency and yield was enormous. Before this, seeds were often broadcast by hand, scattered haphazardly across the field, leading to inefficiency, uneven germination, and significant waste of precious seed. The seed drill, however, precisely planted seeds in neat, evenly spaced rows at specific depths, dramatically increasing germination rates, improving overall crop yields, and reducing waste, thus making farming more productive and reliable. Furthermore, the systematic and scientific selective breeding of livestock, championed by enterprising landowners like Robert Bakewell, who meticulously recorded and bred his sheep and cattle for specific traits like lean meat or high wool yield, led to larger, healthier, and more productive animals that matured more quickly, producing more meat, more wool, and more milk per animal. These cumulative agricultural improvements meant that significantly more food could be produced by fewer people, leading to a crucial surplus of food that could sustain a rapidly growing urban population. And, perhaps even more importantly for the nascent industrial movement, it created a significant surplus of labor. Individuals no longer strictly needed on the farms due to increased efficiency, who were now available and often compelled to move to urban centers and work in the emerging new industries, providing the essential workforce for the factory system, hand in hand with the agricultural revolution and sometimes its dark underbelly, was the powerful and often controversial enclosure movement. For centuries, much of England's agricultural land was organized into open fields, common pastures, and shared woodlands, often farmed communally by villagers, with traditional rights and customs passed down through generations. Enclosure was the legal and physical process, often enforced by acts of parliament obtained by powerful landowners through significant financial investment, by which these common lands were fenced off, consolidated into individual privately owned farms, and often managed as large consolidated estates by a single wealthy landowner or a few large proprietors. While proponents argued, and indeed often demonstrated, that enclosure led to more efficient farming practices, larger, more easily managed fields, and greater agricultural output, which benefited the nation as a whole, it also had a devastating social cost for the rural poor and for traditional communal life. Many small farmers, often tenant farmers, or those with traditional common rights for grazing their animals or gathering fuel, suddenly lost their traditional rights and their very livelihoods, their subsistence economy destroyed by the loss of access to common resources. They could no longer compete with the larger, more capitalized landowners, and faced with economic destitution, loss of traditional community, and eviction from the land they and their ancestors had worked for generations, many were left with little choice but to seek any kind of work, however arduous or poorly paid, in the burgeoning towns and cities. This process, therefore, created a vast, readily available, and often desperate labor force. Individuals with little bargaining power and few alternatives but to seek employment in the emerging factories, becoming a critical, albeit often unwilling and exploited, ingredient for the rise of factories and the expanding industrial workforce. Britain also possessed a unique and powerful confluence of other advantages that made it the ideal crucible for the Industrial Revolution to ignite and flourish almost as if destiny had prepared it. It enjoyed a prolonged period of remarkable political stability, particularly when compared to other major European nations that were frequently embroiled in internal conflicts, dynastic wars, or revolutionary upheavals, such as France. This internal stability solidified after the Glorious Revolution of 1688 and the establishment of a constitutional monarchy, fostered an environment conducive to long-term economic growth, sustained innovation, and confident investment from both domestic and foreign sources, as investors could be reasonably sure of their property rights and the stability of the legal system. Furthermore, the British government adopted policies that actively encouraged trade, enterprise, and invention, including a strong, well-established legal system that protected property rights and contracts, vital for investors, entrepreneurs, and inventors to feel secure in their ventures and confident that their efforts and financial investments would yield rewards, notably through patent laws. The absence of internal tariffs or customs duties within Britain also fostered a large unified domestic market, allowing goods and raw materials to move freely and cheaply across the entire island, unlike fragmented continental markets. Its vast, expanding colonial empire, sprawling across the globe, provided both a cheap and abundant source of vital raw materials, particularly vast quantities of raw cotton from India and the Americas, especially the southern United States, and crucially captive and expanding markets for its rapidly increasing volume of manufactured goods, creating a powerful self-reinforcing global economic network where Britain was at the lucrative center, its ships dominating world trade routes. And perhaps most importantly, Britain was blessed with an unparalleled abundance of essential natural resources located conveniently close to each other, minimizing transport costs for heavy materials. Vast reserves of high-quality coal, the essential fuel for steam power and new metallurgical processes, particularly in regions like the Midlands and the Northeast. Large deposits of iron ore, the very backbone of new machinery, industrial structures, and tools, often found in proximity to coal, and a dense, easily navigable network of rivers that could be readily improved and connected by an expanding system of canals, perfect for transporting heavy, bulky goods like coal and iron over significant distances before the age of railways, forming an early transport grid. This unique and powerful combination of factors, an agricultural surplus supporting a growing population, a mobile and often desperate labor force, political stability, a massive colonial empire providing raw materials and markets, a strong legal and financial framework conducive to investment and innovation, and rich, accessible natural resources made Britain a truly fertile ground, almost a perfect storm, for the Industrial Revolution to take root, flourish, and spread its transformative power across its landscape and eventually the world. As these foundational changes were taking place, creating the necessary conditions and immense pressures, a particular industry began to feel the intense demands and unprecedented opportunities for innovation most acutely, becoming the initial engine of the revolution: the textile industry. For centuries, clothing was made primarily from wool or linen, fibers that were relatively easy to process by hand using traditional methods. Cotton, while known and highly desired for its softness, lightness, comfort, and ease of washing compared to wool, was difficult to process in its raw form due to its sticky seeds and fibrous nature, and therefore remained an expensive luxury, largely imported as finished fabric calico from India. But global demand for textiles was booming, fueled by population growth, expanding trade networks, and changing fashion trends that increasingly favored lighter, washable cotton fabrics. The traditional cottage industry, with its slow, manual processes performed in scattered homes, simply couldn't keep up with this escalating demand. This growing imbalance between surging demand and the severely limited capacity for manual production created an urgent, almost desperate need for faster, more efficient, and larger-scale methods of spinning raw fiber into yarn and then weaving that yarn into cloth. And this is precisely where the revolution truly began to take shape, not with one grand, all-encompassing invention, but with a series of interconnected, often iterative, mechanical innovations, each building upon or responding to the previous, one and each solving a bottleneck only to create a new one further down the production line, thus driving continuous, almost self-perpetuating invention and refinement. The process of making cloth traditionally involved two main distinct stages. First, meticulously spinning raw fibers, like wool, linen, or cotton, into long, continuous threads or yarn, and second, painstakingly weaving that yarn into fabric on a loom. Both processes were incredibly labor-intensive, time-consuming, and inherently slow, severely limiting overall output and driving up costs. A single weaver operating a hand loom often needed several spinners working full-time just to keep him supplied with enough yarn to continue weaving without interruption, creating a chronic and frustrating shortage of yarn that limited production. This persistent bottleneck in yarn production was the first to be addressed by a series of ingenious, though often initially crude, mechanical inventions. In 1733, John Kay, a perceptive weaver from Bury, Lancashire, invented the flying shuttle, PUI'd. Prior to this invention, weavers had to manually pass the shuttle, which carried the weft thread horizontally across the warp threads, back and forth through the shed, the opening in the warp threads created by the loom's mechanism, by hand. This was a slow, tedious, and physically demanding process, and for wider looms, it often required two people working in tandem, one on each side, further increasing labor costs. Kay's ingenious invention, which used levers and springs to propel the shuttle across the loom automatically with a quick jerk of a cord, drastically sped up the weaving process. It allowed a single weaver to operate a wider loom more efficiently and much faster than two had done before, effectively doubling the speed of weaving and increasing the width of cloth that could be produced. This immediate success, however, created a new severe imbalance and a new bottleneck in the production chain. Suddenly, weavers could work much faster than spinners could produce yarn. The bottleneck had dramatically, almost explosively, shifted from weaving to spinning, creating immense pressure and a powerful incentive for innovation in yarn production to keep up with the new, faster looms. The pressure was now intensely on the spinners to catch up with the faster looms, a challenge that spurred the next wave of innovation. In the 1760s, a humble weaver and carpenter named James Hargreaves, also from Lancashire, invented the spinning jenny. Legend has it he got the idea after seeing an overturned spinning wheel still spinning on its side, suggesting how multiple spindles could be operated by a single wheel and person. His ingenious machine allowed a single spinner to operate multiple spindles simultaneously, initially 8, then rapidly evolving to 20, then even 80, greatly increasing the output of yarn from a single worker, making it exponentially more productive than a traditional single spindle wheel. It was still hand-powered, relatively small enough to be used in cottages, and for a time it revolutionized home-based spinning, providing much-needed relief to the weaving industry and boosting cottage industry output. However, the yarn it produced, while abundant, was often coarse, relatively weak, and prone to breaking, limiting its applicability for finer fabrics and its overall durability, creating a new quality challenge. The real breakthrough in yarn strength, consistency, and scale of production came with Richard Arkwright's water frame, patented in 1769. Arkwright, a shrewd and ambitious barber and wig maker by trade, was less a pure inventor and more an entrepreneurial force, a master of organization and commercial shrewdness. His machine was a monumental improvement over the jenny, using a series of cleverly designed rollers, drafting rollers, to draw out and twist the cotton fibers, producing a much stronger, finer, and more consistent thread. Crucially, the water frame was too large, too heavy, and too complex to be powered by hand or foot. It required a more powerful, continuous, and external source of energy, namely water power, harnessed from fast-flowing rivers. This necessity led to the construction of dedicated, large-scale factories, typically built near fast-flowing rivers or streams to harness their energy, such as the River Derwent. Cromford Mill, Arkwright's first successful water-powered cotton spinning mill in Derbyshire, became the functional prototype for the modern factory system. Workers, often entire families from rural areas facing displacement by enclosure and the decline of cottage industry, moved to these mill sites, living in purpose-built housing provided by the mill owner, and working fixed, long hours under strict factory discipline, subject to bells and rules, losing the autonomy of home-based work. This centralized, disciplined system of labor and production, with its large-scale machinery and concentrated workforce, was as revolutionary in its social and economic implications as the machinery itself, creating a new industrial landscape. The next major innovation, a brilliant synthesis of previous ideas, was Samuel Crompton's spinning mule, or muone, invented in 1779. It was a superb hybrid, combining the best features of Hargreaves' intermittent spinning jenny, which produced multiple threads, and Arkwright's continuous water frame, which produced strong thread. The mule produced yarn that was both strong and incredibly fine, suitable for a wide range of textiles, including the delicate muslin that had previously been very difficult and expensive to make by hand. The mule's design also proved highly adaptable and could be scaled up significantly, making it ideal for the rapidly expanding factory system. Crucially, later versions of the mule were adapted for steam power, further accelerating production. and making it possible to build factories anywhere, no longer tied to specific river locations, thus liberating industry from its geographical constraints and contributing to the explosive, unprecedented growth of inland industrial cities like Manchester and Glasgow. With the production of yarn now massively increased by these successive inventions, creating a flood of thread, the bottleneck in textile production shifted decisively back to weaving, which was still largely a manual process on hand looms, albeit faster ones, thanks to Kay's shuttle. This final key challenge was addressed by Edmund Cartwright's power loom, patented in 1785. While his early versions were inefficient, prone to breakdowns, and mechanically clunky, often requiring significant human intervention and frequent repairs, subsequent improvements by others like Robert Roberts, who developed more practical and robust versions in the 1820s, made them truly effective and widespread. The power loom mechanized the weaving process, allowing a single worker to supervise multiple looms simultaneously, dramatically increasing the speed, volume, and consistency of cloth production to truly industrial scales, completing the mechanization of the primary textile processes and leading to the eventual decline of hand loom weavers. Finally, to feed these hungry, rapidly expanding textile machines, which demanded vast quantities of raw material, there was an urgent and immense need for a vastly increased and continuous supply of raw cotton. Across the Atlantic in the American South, upland cotton was grown in abundance, but separating the sticky green seeds from the delicate white cotton fibers was an incredibly laborious, slow, and manual process, making large-scale cultivation economically impractical, despite the suitable climate. In 1793, Eli Whitney's cotton gin, short for engine, revolutionized this bottleneck in raw material processing. It rapidly separated the seeds from the fibers using a rotating cylinder with wire teeth, making cotton production enormously profitable and spurring an explosion in cotton cultivation across the southern United States. This tragically and inextricably also solidified and dramatically expanded the institution of slavery, as plantation owners sought ever more enslaved labor to pick the vastly increased yields of cotton. The raw material from the American South, produced by enslaved labor, fueled the burgeoning mills of Britain, creating a powerful, interconnected, transatlantic economic system dependent on both industrial innovation in Britain and, shamefully, human exploitation in America, linking the global supply chain in a brutal dynamic of profit and suffering. The cumulative effect of these interconnected inventions was truly revolutionary, creating an entirely new industrial landscape and fundamentally altering the relationship between labor, capital, and production. Textile production moved definitively and rapidly from scattered cottages to centralized, massive, and specialized factories, often operating 24 hours a day. The factory system, while a marvel of organizational logic, scale, and efficiency, also brought with it a new harsh reality for the laborers: incredibly long hours, pitifully low wages, dangerous machinery, and repetitive, monotonous tasks performed under strict supervision and relentless pace. Women and children, who could be paid less than men and were often considered more dexterous for certain intricate tasks like piecing broken threads or navigating tight machinery spaces, formed a significant, often majority portion of the factory workforce, enduring harsh, unsanitary, and often unsafe conditions. But the sheer volume of cloth being produced was utterly unprecedented, transforming clothing from a scarce, expensive commodity into an affordable and accessible product for the general population, fundamentally changing consumer patterns and gradually raising living standards for many, even as it created immense social disparities. This rapid, interconnected transformation of the textile industry was the primary engine that powered the initial phase of the Industrial Revolution, demonstrating the immense power of mechanization, a concentrated labor, and sequential innovation, setting the stage for even more profound changes in power generation and transportation that would truly define the coming decades and globalize the industrial age, radiating its influence far beyond Britain's shores and transforming the world economy. As the textile industry boomed, with factories growing larger, more numerous, and increasingly ravenous for power, it became overwhelmingly clear that water, power, while effective in its initial sphere and crucial for Arkwright's early mills, had significant inherent limitations that restricted further industrial growth and dictated factory placement. Mills dependent on water had to be located next to fast-flowing rivers or streams, severely limiting their geographic spread to specific valleys and making them perpetually susceptible to seasonal droughts, which could halt production or destructive. Floods which could damage machinery and infrastructure, causing unpredictable downtime. A more reliable, more portable, more consistent, and fundamentally more powerful and consistent energy source was desperately needed to drive the increasingly complex and larger machinery that was emerging across all sectors of industry. One that could be deployed anywhere raw materials and labor were available. And this, of course, brings us to the true beating heart, the very pulse and driving force, the essential engine of the Industrial Revolution. Steam power, a technology that liberated industry from its dependence on natural waterways and allowed it to flourish anywhere coal could be transported, creating a new, dynamic, and centrally located industrial landscape. The fundamental concept of using steam to do mechanical work wasn't entirely new. Rudimentary designs for steam devices existed even in antiquity, like Hero of Alexandria's Aeolipile, and had been experimented with by inventors throughout the centuries, like Denis Papin's steam digester in the 17th century. However, the first truly practical and commercially successful applications emerged in the early 18th century, driven by a very specific and urgent practical problem. Deep coal mines across Britain were constantly flooding with groundwater, making coal extraction incredibly difficult, dangerous, and economically unviable, as valuable coal seams lay submerged. Miners desperately needed powerful, continuous pumps to remove the water from the subterranean depths to keep the mines operational and to access deeper, richer seams of coal to feed the burgeoning demand from urban centers and industries. 1712. Thomas Newcomen, an English blacksmith and ironmonger from Dartmouth, developed the first commercially successful atmospheric engine, often referred to simply as the Newcomen engine. This massive, cumbersome, and rather slow machine operated by introducing steam into a large cylinder. As the steam was then condensed by a jet of cold water, it created a partial vacuum, and the external atmospheric pressure would then push a large piston down, thereby operating a pump rod to lift water out of the mine. It was incredibly inefficient, by later standards consuming vast amounts of coal to operate and characterized by its slow, ponderous beam motion, but crucially, it worked. Newcomen engines were widely deployed in coal mines across Britain, Europe, and even in some of the American colonies, playing a vital role in draining mines and allowing for deeper extraction of coal. Ironically, the very fuel that powered them, creating a symbiotic and essential relationship between coal mining and early steam power. They laid the essential groundwork, proving definitively that steam could indeed be harnessed for useful industrial work on a practical, albeit inefficient, scale, showing the immense potential of thermal energy. The significant leap forward in steam power, however, came with James Watt. A Scottish instrument maker at the University of Glasgow, Watt was tasked with repairing a Newcomen engine model in 1763, an assignment that revealed its fundamental inefficiencies to his keen and analytical eye. He quickly recognized that the constant heating and cooling of the main cylinder with each stroke was a massive waste of energy, consuming a disproportionate amount of steam and thus coal, making it terribly uneconomical. His brilliant insight, patented in 1769, was the invention of the Rahrad separate condensers. Instead of cooling the entire main cylinder itself, which wasted heat and slowed the cycle, Watt's ingenious design condensed the steam in a separate, continuously cooled chamber, allowing the main cylinder to remain hot and therefore more efficient. This innovation dramatically improved the engine's efficiency, reducing fuel consumption by an astonishing 75% or more, and making the steam engine a far more viable, economical, and powerful source of energy for a wider range of applications, opening up entirely new industrial possibilities. Watt didn't stop there with his initial breakthrough. Recognizing the immense potential of his invention, he formed a crucial and highly successful partnership with Matthew Boulton, a successful and visionary manufacturer from Birmingham, who provided the necessary capital, manufacturing expertise, and shrewd marketing acumen. Together, their firm, Boulton and Watt, meticulously refined Watt's engine, adding crucial mechanisms such as the sophisticated sun and planet gears, and later the more common crank, to convert the engine's reciprocating up and down motion into continuous rotary circular motion. They also introduced the centrifugal governor to regulate speed, and developed the double-acting engine, where steam pushed the piston both up and down, further increasing power and smoothness. This conversion to rotary motion was absolutely critical because it meant the steam engine could now directly drive a multitude of complex factory machinery, not just pumps. Factories no longer needed to be built alongside rivers. They could be located anywhere. Coal could be cheaply transported, leading to the rapid and often explosive growth of industrial towns and cities in areas rich in coal and iron, like Manchester, Birmingham, and the infamous Black Country. The Watt steam engine became the versatile, immensely powerful, and omnipresent workhorse of the Industrial Revolution, powering textile mills, ironworks, breweries, flour mills, potteries, and eventually becoming the driving force behind locomotives and steamships. Its widespread impact was truly foundational, liberating industry from its dependence on natural water sources and allowing for the unprecedented concentration of production and labor in urban centers, fundamentally transforming the very geography and demography of industrial society and changing forever the relationship between industry and its physical location. The soaring, insatiable demand for coal to fuel these ever more numerous and powerful steam engines and to support the burgeoning iron industry spurred its own parallel and equally brutal industrial transformation. Coal mining became a massive, essential industry, employing vast numbers of people, often entire communities and generations, whose lives revolved around the pit. It was, however, a notoriously dangerous, back-breaking, and brutally exploitative profession. Miners faced constant life-threatening risks from sudden cave-ins, devastating explosions due to highly flammable methane gas, terrifyingly known as fire damp, suffocating coal dust leading to chronic lung diseases like pneumoconiosis or black lung, and perpetual flooding from underground springs. The work was performed in darkness, damp, and cramped conditions, often by children and women. Innovations like Humphrey Davy's 1815 safety lamp, which provided light without igniting methane, significantly reduced some of the explosion risks, but mining remained a perilous occupation, marked by intense physical hardship, early disability, and tragically short life expectancies for those who toiled underground. The growing demand for this vital fuel also necessitated continuous improvements in mining techniques, ventilation systems, often rudimentary and dangerous, involving trapdoors worked by children, and, crucially, in transportation methods to efficiently bring the coal from the subterranean pits to the factories, furnaces, and homes that desperately needed its energy, fostering further innovation in transport systems. Closely intertwined with the story of coal and steam was the parallel revolution in the iron industry, a sector that provided the very backbone, the literal material, for the new machinery and infrastructure that defined the age and allowed its expansion. Iron was the fundamental material for building the new machines, the powerful steam engines themselves, the structural integrity of factory buildings, sturdy bridges, and eventually the vast railway networks that would knit nations together and transport the products of industry. Traditional iron smelting, which used charcoal derived from wood as its primary fuel and reducing agent, was becoming increasingly unsustainable due to widespread deforestation and the growing scarcity and expensive timber, limiting the scale of production. In the early 18th century, specifically in 1709, Abraham Darby, a Quaker ironmaster from Coalbrookdale in Shropshire, discovered a revolutionary process for smelting iron using coke, a purified form of coal from which impurities had been baked out in a process similar to charcoal production. This was a monumental game changer, coke being far more abundant, cheaper, and cleaner burning than charcoal, produced purer iron and allowed for much larger scale production in greatly enlarged blast furnaces, effectively freeing the iron industry from its precarious reliance on increasingly scarce wood resources and allowing for massive, unprecedented increases in iron output. Later in the century, in the 1780s, Henry Court, an ironmaster from Gosport in Hampshire, developed two further transformative processes that revolutionized iron production, puddling and rolling. The puddling process involved stirring molten pig iron, brittle, high-carbon iron from the blast furnace, in a reverberatory furnace where the heat reflected off the roof, preventing direct contact between the fuel and the iron, to remove impurities, like carbon and sulfur through oxidation, producing a much more malleable, ductile, and significantly stronger form of iron known as wrought iron, which could be shaped and stretched. The subsequent rolling process then used grooved rollers to shape the hot, semi-molten iron into standardized bars, rails, or other forms, replacing the incredibly laborious, slow, and imprecise hammering of traditional blacksmith, ensuring consistency, speed, and uniformity of shape. These innovations dramatically increased both the quality and quantity of iron available, transforming it from a relatively scarce, expensive, and difficult-to-work material into an abundant, affordable, and incredibly versatile one. Stronger, cheaper, and more consistently produced iron meant more robust and reliable machinery that could operate under greater stress for longer periods, more durable bridges that could span wider gaps and bear heavier loads, and the eventual possibility of constructing iron ships and the vast railway networks that would further connect the nation, and eventually the world, proving the material's strength, adaptability, and fundamental importance to the new industrial age. The powerful combination of abundant coal, now efficiently extracted due to Newcomen engines and mined on a larger scale, then processed by Darby's coke and fueled by powerful and efficient steam engines, which in turn were built from mass-produced iron using quartz methods, created a potent, self-reinforcing, and unstoppable feedback loop. Coal fueled the steam engines, which in turn powered the machines that mined more coal and processed more iron. The iron, in turn, was used to build more steam engines, more sophisticated machinery, and the essential infrastructure to move these materials and goods more efficiently and at greater scale. This dynamic triumvirate of coal, steam, and iron formed the undisputed technological core of the first industrial revolution, allowing for an unprecedented scale of production, fundamentally altering the landscape of industry and forever changing how things were made, powered, and moved. creating a new epoch of technological possibility and laying the foundation for modern heavy industry, from shipbuilding to construction. With factories churning out goods at an ever-increasing pace, and raw materials and fuel needed in vast quantities for these new, rapidly expanding industries, the existing transportation infrastructure of the mid-18th century proved utterly inadequate and became a major bottleneck, threatening to stifle the very growth it facilitated. Roads were often mere dirt tracks, impassable mud pits in winter, choking clouds of dust in summer, and perpetually riddled with ruts and potholes, making them excruciatingly slow, expensive, and damaging for transporting goods, particularly fragile or heavy ones. River transport, while better than roads for heavy goods, was limited to areas with naturally navigable waterways and could be seasonal, susceptible to low water levels in summer or freezing in winter. The urgent, pressing need for efficient, cheap, and fast movement of massive quantities of raw materials to the factories and finished goods from the factories to the burgeoning markets became paramount for the continued growth, profitability, and expansion of industry and trade. This urgent necessity sparked the next great wave of innovation, profoundly shaping the physical landscape, dissolving geographical barriers, and connecting the nation like never before. The transportation revolution. Initially, attention turned to improving existing methods, driven by the immediate necessity of smoother, more reliable trade. Roads saw significant, albeit incremental, advancements during this period, notably through the pioneering work of engineers like John Macadam in the early 19th century. Macadam developed a systematic method of building roads using carefully graded layers of crushed stone, with smaller stones on top which were then compacted by traffic. These macadamized roads were significantly more durable, shed water effectively due to their cambered, curved surface, and provided a smoother, firmer surface, allowing for faster travel, heavier loads with less effort for horses, and reduced wear and tear on wagons and carriages. Turnpikes, privately owned roads where users paid a toll for their construction and upkeep, also became more common, encouraging private investment in better infrastructure and gradually improving intercity connectivity for goods and people, though still relatively slowly and expensively compared to what was to come. However, for moving truly heavy, bulky goods like coal, iron, building materials, and large quantities of raw agricultural produce over significant distances, roads remained relatively inefficient, slow, and expensive, particularly given the growing volumes of bulk goods required by industry. The more revolutionary solution lay in canals, which offered a fundamentally different and superior mode of transport for bulk goods, harnessing the power of water. Canals offered a smooth, remarkably friction-free surface, allowing barges to carry enormous loads, sometimes many times the capacity of a traditional horse-drawn wagon, compared to land transport, and at a fraction of the cost per ton-mile. The canal mania truly took hold in the late 18th century, beginning with the groundbreaking Bridgewater Canal, commissioned by the far-sighted Francis Egerton, the Duke of Bridgewater, and engineered by the brilliant but eccentric self-taught genius James Brindley. This canal, completed in 1761, was built specifically and innovatively to transport coal from the Duke's mines at Worsley directly to the burgeoning industrial city of Manchester, a distance of about 10 miles, avoiding congested roads and high transport costs. Its immediate economic impact was astonishing. It famously halved the price of coal in Manchester almost overnight, vividly demonstrating the immense economic power, transformative potential, and immediate profitability of canals. The astounding success of the Bridgewater Canal ignited a frenzy of canal building across Britain. Thousands of miles of canals were meticulously dug and constructed, often through incredible feats of engineering and immense manual labor by large navvy gangs, creating a dense, interconnected network that linked major industrial centers, burgeoning towns, vital ports, and raw material sources. Ingenious solutions were developed to navigate challenging terrain, elaborate lock systems, often organized in sequences like staircases, lifted and lowered barges over changing elevations, towering aqueducts like Brindley's magnificent Barton. Aqueduct, which carried the canal over the Irwell River, defied gravity and demonstrated remarkable engineering prowess, and long tunnels were excavated through hills and mountains, pushing the boundaries of civil engineering. Canal networks became the crucial arteries of the early industrial economy, facilitating the widespread movement of goods, dramatically lowering transportation costs, opening up new domestic markets, and contributing significantly to Britain's burgeoning economic dominance and the expansion of its internal markets, forming a cohesive national economy. They reigned supreme for heavy bulk transport for several decades, effectively revolutionizing inland distribution. Yet even canals had their limitations. They could freeze solid in winter, be affected by droughts in summer, were relatively slow in speed, typically 3 to 4 miles per hour, and were ultimately restricted by geography and topography, often requiring circuitous routes around hills or through multiple locks, limiting directness. The ultimate game changer in transportation, which would truly shrink distances, dramatically accelerate the pace of life, and revolutionize logistics on an unprecedented scale, would be railways. The fundamental concept of rails wasn't new. Horse-drawn wagonways or tramways had been used for centuries, particularly in coal mines and quarries, to move heavy loads over short distances from the pithead to a nearby river or canal, providing a smoother surface than roads. But the idea of combining these guided rails with the revolutionary power of the steam engine was truly transformative and utterly changed the scale of possibility for land transport, freeing it from the limitations of animal power. Early pioneers, like Richard Trevithick, a daring Cornish engineer, were instrumental in these initial steps. In 1801, he built his Puffing Devil, a full-scale steam road locomotive, and in 1804, another locomotive for the Penydarren Ironworks in South Wales. These early experiments demonstrated the immense potential of self-propelled steam engines, running on rails, proving their ability to haul significant weights, albeit with limitations like breaking the brittle cast iron rails of the time due to their immense weight or limited adhesion. However, it was. George Stephenson, a largely self-taught engineer from a mining background who rose from humble beginnings through sheer determination, practical genius, and a meticulous understanding of mechanics, who truly ushered in the practical, viable, and commercially successful railway age. Stephenson had a deep intuitive understanding of steam engines and a practical genius for locomotive design, constantly improving their efficiency, reliability, and power for colliery lines. The pivotal moment for public railways arrived with the Fee, Stockton, and Darlington Railway, which opened in 1825. While primarily designed for carrying coal from the mines at Shildon to the port of Stockton, it crucially also became the first public railway in the world to carry passengers, demonstrating its dual potential and appealing to the public imagination and investment. Stephenson's locomotive, Locomotion No. 1, pulled the inaugural train, marking a new significant era in transport history. But the real public spectacle, the moment that truly captured the world's imagination and launched the railway age into a global phenomenon, came with the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. Opened in 1830, this line, designed to connect two major industrial and port cities, was a massive and challenging engineering feat, overcoming formidable geographical obstacles. It involved vast cuttings through hills, formidable embankments across valleys, impressive bridges like the Sankey Viaduct, a multi-arch structure, and long tunnels traversing challenging terrain like the infamous Chatmoss Bog, which Stephenson successfully engineered across by floating the railway on a foundation of compressed peat and timber. The famous Rainhill trials of 1829 were held to select the best locomotive for this line, a highly publicized competition that drew immense public interest and investment. It was won by Stephenson's iconic The Rocket, which incorporated key innovations like the multi-tube boiler and blast pipe. It was a marvel of engineering for its time, reaching speeds of up to 30 miles per hour, an almost unimaginable velocity for the era, frightening to some and exhilarating to others, and decisively proving the viability, speed, and immense economic power of steam-powered rail transport for rapid, long-distance movement of both goods and passengers. The resounding success of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway triggered a dramatic railway mania across Britain and subsequently across the world, as investors rushed to fund new lines. Thousands upon thousands of miles of railway lines were meticulously laid, often through Herculean efforts involving armies of navvies, short for navigators, who literally moved mountains, dug vast cuttings, filled deep valleys with shears. Manual labor, enduring incredibly harsh conditions, long hours, low pay, and often dying from accidents or disease. Railways offered unprecedented speed, enormous carrying capacity for both goods and passengers, and newfound reliability in all weather conditions, largely unaffected by frost or drought. They created truly national markets by drastically reducing transport costs and times, allowing goods to move cheaply and quickly across the entire country, no longer limited by geographical barriers or the slow, expensive vagaries of road or even canal transport, leading to greater specialization and regional prosperity. They facilitated the movement of people on a scale never before imagined, allowing for leisure travel, mass migration to industrial centers, and the rapid spread of ideas, news, and cultural influences far more rapidly than ever before, fostering a more interconnected national identity and even leading to the standardization of time zones across Britain to coordinate train schedules. The psychological impact was profound. The world felt smaller, more connected, and undeniably faster, fundamentally altering human perception of distance and time. Finally, while railways dominated land transport, what did steamships began to conquer the seas and oceans, effectively shrinking the world's watery expanses and accelerating global trade and communication. Early efforts, such as Robert Fulton's North River steamboat Clermont in 1807 on the Hudson River, demonstrated the initial viability of steam power for water transport, though early models were limited by their reliance on bulky, inefficient paddle wheels, restricted fuel capacity, and susceptibility to rough seas. By the mid-19th century, more sophisticated paddle steamers and later, more efficient screw propeller steamships were revolutionizing ocean travel. They dramatically reduced transatlantic journey times from weeks to mere days, providing predictable schedules and opening up new global trade routes with unparalleled reliability and speed. These advancements facilitated mass emigration across oceans, faster communication, leading directly to the laying of transatlantic cables, and the vast expansion of international trade networks, making the world economy truly global. The powerful combination of extensive railway networks on land and powerful steamships at sea created a truly integrated and rapidly expanding global economy, shrinking distances, accelerating the pace of international commerce and communication, and laying the groundwork for a truly interconnected modern world, fundamentally altering global trade patterns, human interaction, and the flow of information on a scale previously unimaginable. The Industrial Revolution, while an undeniable period of astonishing technological, economic, and infrastructure advancement, also brought about profound, often brutal, and immensely painful social transformations. The rapid and unprecedented shift from an agrarian, largely rural, and tradition-bound society to an industrial, urban, and modern one was inherently disruptive, dismantling traditional ways of life, leading to immense human cost, the emergence of entirely new social hierarchies, and a host of daunting, complex challenges that governments, communities, and individuals struggle desperately to comprehend, adapt to, and address. The most visible and immediate social change was the mass migration to cities, a phenomenon often referred to as rapid urbanization, which dramatically altered the human landscape and created new social realities. As factories, mines, and workshops sprung up in areas with ready access to coal, iron, and transportation hubs, and as agricultural improvements and the relentless enclosure movement pushed people off the land, millions of men, women, and children flocked to these burgeoning urban centers in search of work, often desperate for any form of employment, however meager or dangerous, simply to survive. Cities like Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, and Glasgow grew at an explosive, almost unimaginable rate, their populations often doubling or tripling within a few decades, swelling from relatively small market towns into sprawling, grimy, and chaotic industrial metropolises, magnets for a vast new workforce. This rapid urbanization, however, was largely unplanned, uncontrolled, and utterly unregulated by civic authorities, who were overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the influx and often lacked the administrative capacity, financial resources, or foresight to cope with the challenges. The result was appalling living conditions. For the vast majority of the working class, the newly formed urban proletariat, in stark contrast to the burgeoning wealth of the industrialists. Houses were built quickly, cheaply, and with a ruthless disregard for hygiene, ventilation, light, or human dignity, maximizing profits for speculative builders. They were typically crammed together in densely packed back-to-back terraces, often with no yard or garden, lacking proper foundations, with little or no access to fresh air, natural light, or proper drainage. Slums proliferated, characterized by extreme overcrowding, often with multiple families living in single, damp, cramped rooms, sharing a single dilapidated house with dozens of others. Sometimes entire families lived in damp, rat-infested cellars, open to the elements, without furniture or proper sanitation. Sanitation was virtually non-existent. There were no proper sewage systems or organized refuse collection. Human and animal waste, along with industrial effluent and discarded refuse, were simply thrown into the unpaved streets or flowed into open festering drains and overflowing privies, inevitably contaminating the scarce and often shared water sources, often communal pumps or polluted rivers. Clean drinking water was a luxury, and diseases like cholera, which struck in devastating epidemics, typhoid, smallpox, and tuberculosis, the White Plague, spread like wildfire through these congested, unsanitary environments, decimating populations with horrifying regularity. Life expectancy in these industrial towns plummeted dramatically, especially for children, who often didn't survive past the age of 5 due to disease, malnutrition, and accidents, with infant mortality rates soaring. The air was thick with the suffocating, acrid smoke from countless factory chimneys and coal fires, creating a perpetual smog that led to widespread respiratory illnesses and a pervasive, unhealthy grime that coated everything, creating what was known as the Dark Satanic Mills landscape, a visual representation of social despair. Working conditions in the factories and mines were equally, if not more, brutal, dehumanizing, and inherently dangerous. The factory system demanded a new kind of discipline, vastly different from the flexible, often seasonal rhythms of agricultural or cottage work, which allowed for some autonomy. Workers faced incredibly long hours, typically 12 to 16 hours a day, sometimes even longer, 6 days a week, often with little to no break for meals or rest, and no holidays, except perhaps a single day, like Christmas. Wages were pitifully low, barely enough to cover the most basic subsistence for an individual, and often subject to arbitrary deductions for fines for lateness, talking, singing, or even looking out the window, breakage of machinery, or paid in company tokens, the notorious truck system, effectively trapping workers in debt to the company store from which they were forced to buy overpriced goods. The work itself was repetitive, monotonous, and extremely dangerous. Machinery was unguarded, with no safety mechanisms, exposed moving parts, and poor lighting, leading to frequent and horrific accidents. Lost limbs, debilitating crush injuries, crippling deformities, and even instantaneous death were common occurrences, and there was no concept of worker safety, compensation for injury, or any form of benefits like sick pay or pensions to support the injured or their destitute families. Factory owners and their overseers wielded immense, almost absolute power, often enforcing rules with harsh physical punishment, particularly for child laborers, and fostering an atmosphere of fear and subservience. Perhaps the most tragic and morally indefensible aspect of industrial labor was the widespread child labor. Children as young as 5 or 6 were routinely employed in factories and mines, often for the same exhausting long hours as adults, sometimes starting work before dawn and returning after dark. They were valued by employers for their small size and nimble fingers, which allowed them to fit into narrow mine shafts to retrieve coal or to crawl into intricate machinery to clear jams and tie broken threads, piecers, and scavengers, tasks that adults could not perform. They were also paid significantly less than women or men, making them an economically attractive, exploitable labor force, essential to the profitability of many enterprises. The work was physically and mentally exhausting, leading to severe deformities from working in cramped spaces, carrying heavy loads, or standing for long hours, stunted growth, chronic illnesses like cotton dust-induced lung diseases, and tragically premature death, often before adolescence. Chimney sweeps, small boys forced into narrow, hot, and suffocating flues to clean them, faced truly horrific conditions, often dying young from suffocation, burns, or cancer from the soot. Young boys and girls worked in textile mills, inhaling cotton dust, developing debilitating lung diseases, or toiled in coal mines in oppressive darkness, dampness, and perpetual danger, often hauling heavy coal carts through narrow, unstable tunnels. The Industrial Revolution also led to the emergence of new, distinct social classes, fundamentally altering the social structure of society and creating new forms of identity, class consciousness, and simmering conflict. At the very top were the industrial capitalists, the factory owners, mine owners, bankers, and wealthy merchants who amassed immense fortunes from the new industries, often through shrewd investment, ruthless risk-taking, efficient organization, and the exploitation of labor. They lived lives of immense luxury and comfort in grand new estates, in stark contrast to the squalor endured by their workers, forming a powerful new elite that challenged the old landed aristocracy for social and political dominance. Below them, a growing and increasingly influential middle class emerged, consisting of professionals like doctors, lawyers, engineers, and administrators, as well as shopkeepers, clerks, and skilled artisans, all of whom benefited from the increased complexity, wealth, and opportunities of society, forming a significant professional and entrepreneurial stratum that valued hard work, self-reliance, respectability, and moral improvement. But at the bottom, forming the vast majority of the urban population, was the formidable urban proletariat, the industrial working class, who owned little more than their own labor power and whose lives were characterized by pervasive poverty, chronic insecurity, immense physical hardship, and a profound sense of alienation from the products of their labor. This stark and increasingly visible division, often exacerbated by the geographical segregation of wealthy suburbs from grim slums, created immense social tensions, deep-seated resentment, and simmering discontent that would eventually erupt into organized protest and calls for radical change. Family life changed dramatically, too. The traditional home ceased to be a center of production as work moved definitively to the centralized factory or mine, fundamentally altering the family's economic unit and disrupting traditional gender roles. Family members often worked in different places, perhaps in different factories or different mines, and for different staggered shifts, leading to a fragmentation of the traditional family unit and a weakening of traditional family bonds, as parents and children spent little time together, sometimes only passing each other in the street. The decline of close-knit, supportive community bonds that characterized rural villages in favor of the anonymous, rapidly growing, and impersonal industrial cities also led to increased social problems, including widespread crime, prostitution, alcoholism, and general social disorganization, creating a sense of moral panic among the middle and upper classes, who often blamed the poor for their own plight, attributing it to moral failings rather than systemic issues. Initial responses to these harsh realities were often desperate, localized, and largely unorganized, born out of immediate suffering and frustration. The Bandi Luddites, skilled textile artisans, frame breakers, who saw their traditional livelihoods, crafts, and economic independence threatened by the new machines and the factory system, famously protested against the introduction of new machinery. By smashing power looms and stocking frames in the early 19th century, from 1811 to 1816, they weren't necessarily against technology itself, but against its disruptive impact on their traditional way of life, the devaluation of their skills, the loss of their jobs, and the subsequent wage depression that accompanied de-skilling. Their protests, however, were brutally suppressed by government forces, often with severe penalties, including execution or transportation to penal colonies, reflecting the state's determination to protect industrial property and nascent capitalism. Other forms of agricultural unrest, like the swing riots of the 1830s, saw rural laborers destroying threshing machines and protesting low wages, showing the widespread discontent across both urban and rural areas. However, as the century progressed and the scale of the problems became undeniable, more organized and sustained forms of resistance and powerful calls for reform emerged from various quarters of society. The appalling conditions gradually led to public outcry and increasing pressure for change, both from concerned individuals, religious groups like evangelical Christians and Methodists, and from the burgeoning working class itself, who began to organize. Early philanthropists and social reformers, Bastille, like the visionary utopian socialist and successful factory owner Robert Owen, became prominent figures. Owen genuinely believed that by creating model communities with fundamentally good working conditions, fair wages, widespread education for children, and decent housing, industrial society could be humane, prosperous, and harmonious for all, demonstrating that profit and ethics were not mutually exclusive and that environment shaped character rather than inherent depravity. His new Lanark Mills in Scotland became a celebrated, albeit isolated, example of a humane industrial enterprise, a testament to his vision, though his broader schemes for ideal communities, like New Harmony in the U.S., often failed due to practical difficulties in implementation and challenges of human nature. Other utopian socialists, like Charles Fourier and Henri de Saint-Simon, also proposed elaborate ideal social blueprints, often centered around cooperation rather than competition. Eventually, the British Parliament, pressured by growing public awareness, fueled by parliamentary reports and shocking accounts, powerful reform movements, often led by figures like Lord Shaftesbury, and the increasing strength of organized labor, began to pass a series of factory acts, starting tentatively in 1802 with the Health and Morals of Apprentices Act, but becoming more significant from the 1833 Factory Act. These acts, while initially weak, poorly enforced, and fiercely resisted by industrialists who cited concerns about competitiveness and property rights, gradually and very slowly introduced crucial regulations limiting working hours for children, e.g., no children under 9 to work in textile factories, those under 18 not to work more than 12 hours, then later, for women, setting minimum ages for employment in factories and mines, and attempting to improve basic safety conditions and provide for rudimentary education. The Mines Acts from 1842 prohibited women and children under 10 from working underground, a significant step. Public health acts were also passed, notably after Edwin Chadwick's influential Report on the Sanitary Condition of the Laboring Population of Great Britain, 1842, which shocked the nation with its grim statistics. These acts led to gradual improvements in urban infrastructure, such as the development of proper sewage systems, clean water supply, and public lighting, though progress was painfully slow and often met with resistance from entrenched vested interests and complacent local authorities. The nascent trade union movement also began to gain significant momentum as workers gradually realized that collective action was their only effective way to demand better wages, shorter hours, and improved conditions from powerful employers. Although initially suppressed and often explicitly illegal, e.g., the Combination Acts of 1799 and 1800 outlawed unions and collective bargaining, fearing revolutionary tendencies and sedition, unions gradually gained legal recognition through persistent struggle, strikes, and political lobbying, becoming a powerful force for advocating for workers' rights. Early unions were often local or craft-based, but gradually amalgamated into larger, more powerful national organizations. Mass political movements such as the Chartist movement of the 1830s and 40s represented a broad nationwide working-class demand for fundamental political reforms, including universal male suffrage, annual parliaments, and vote by secret ballot, seeking to gain political power to address their economic grievances and achieve social justice. This movement, though ultimately unsuccessful in its immediate goals and facing violent suppression, highlighting the difficulty of reform without established political voice, demonstrated the growing political consciousness and desire for representation among the industrial working class, proving their collective power and paving the way for future democratic movements and the eventual expansion of the franchise. The social impact of the Industrial Revolution was a complex, often tragic tapestry woven with threads of unprecedented progress and immense human misery, ultimately laying the groundwork for modern labor laws, public health initiatives, socials, welfare provisions, and the ongoing struggle for social justice and equality that continues to shape our societies to this very day, as we grapple with the enduring legacy of its transformations. Beyond the immediate social, economic, and technological upheaval, the Industrial Revolution also profoundly influenced intellectual and cultural thought, sparking entirely new economic theories, social philosophies, and artistic movements that sought to understand, explain, or critique this unprecedented transformation of human society. The very way people thought about progress, poverty, class, the role of government, individual liberty, and the fundamental nature of human civilization began to shift dramatically in response to these seismic changes, leading to a rich intellectual ferment and a rethinking of traditional values. In the realm of economics, the Industrial Revolution provided fertile ground for new ideas and solidified existing ones into a coherent framework that largely justified its rapid, often brutal, growth. The dominant theory that emerged was classical economics, epitomized by Adam Smith's monumental The Wealth of Nations, published in 1776, even before the revolution was in full swing, but already keenly anticipating its direction and laying out its principles. Smith, a Scottish moral philosopher and economist, advocated for a free market, minimal government intervention in the economy, the famous doctrine of laissez-faire, meaning let do, and the powerful concept of the invisible hand of competition guiding economic activity towards optimal outcomes. He believed that individual self-interest, when allowed to operate freely in a competitive market without undue state interference, would ultimately lead to the greatest good for society as a whole by driving innovation, efficiency, and increasing overall wealth through specialization and the division of labor. His ideas laid the theoretical foundation for industrial capitalism, provided a powerful justification for its rapid growth, and profoundly shaped economic policy for generations, promoting free trade, minimal regulation, and an emphasis on individual enterprise. However, the harsh realities of industrialization, particularly the widespread poverty, exploitation, and suffering of the working class, also gave rise to more pessimistic views within the classical school itself, and to radical new critiques that challenged its fundamental assumptions about inherent harmony and progress. Thomas Malthus, in his influential Essay on the Principle of Population, 1798, famously argued that human population growth would always tend to outstrip the food supply, leading to inevitable cycles of poverty, famine, disease, and misery, unless checked by positive checks, like disease and war, or preventive checks, like moral restraint. This gloomy prediction, known as the Malthusian trap, seemed to be tragically confirmed by the squalor, disease, and high mortality rates of early industrial cities. David Ricardo, another prominent classical economist, developed the iron law of wages, which posited that wages would always tend towards the bare minimum necessary for workers' survival, as any increase would simply lead to more children, thereby increasing the labor supply and driving wages back down due to increased competition for jobs. These classical economists, while advocating for free markets as the most efficient system for wealth creation, painted a rather grim, often fatalistic picture of the future for the industrial working classes, viewing their plight as an almost unavoidable outcome of natural economic laws, thus often justifying governmental inaction on social issues by arguing that intervention would only make matters worse in the long run. Alongside them, utilitarianism secures, championed by Jeremy Bentham, and later John Stuart Mill, emerged as a moral philosophy advocating for actions that produce the greatest good for the greatest number. While initially aligned with laissez-faire, utilitarian principles later provided a philosophical basis for state intervention and social reforms, recognizing that collective well-being might sometimes require regulation in direct and often passionate response to the perceived injustices, stark inequalities, and sheer human cost of industrial capitalism. Various forms of socialism emerged, offering alternative visions for a more just and equitable society, often based on communal ownership, greater state control, or radical reorganization of labor. Robert Owen, whom we mentioned earlier in the context of factory reform, was a key figure in utopian socialism. As a highly successful factory owner himself, he genuinely believed that by creating model communities with fundamentally good working conditions, fair wages, widespread education for children, and decent housing, industrial society could be humane, prosperous, and harmonious for all, demonstrating that profit and ethics were not mutually exclusive and that human character was largely shaped by its environment, not inherent depravity. His new Lanark Mills in Scotland became a celebrated, albeit isolated, example of a humane industrial enterprise, a testament to his vision and practical application of his principles, though his broader schemes for ideal communities, like New Harmony in the U.S., often failed due to practical difficulties in implementation and challenges of human nature. Other utopian socialists like Charles Fourier and Henri de Saint-Simon also proposed elaborate ideal social blueprints, often centered around cooperation, rational organization, and the triumph of science over traditional institutions. The most influential and enduring critique of industrial capitalism which would profoundly shape global political movements for over a century, came from Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Their incendiary Communist Manifesto, published in 1848 amidst the wave of European revolutions, and Marx's monumental multi-volume magnum opus Das Kapital, Voller Freers, published 1867, provided a scathing and systematic analysis of the capitalist system. They argued that history was fundamentally a dialectical struggle between economic classes driven by the modes of production, and that industrial capitalism inherently exploited the proletariat, the property-less working class, for the exclusive benefit of the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class who owned the means of production. Marx meticulously detailed concepts like alienation, workers estranged from their labor, its products, and their fellow humans; surplus value, the profit extracted from workers' unpaid labor beyond what is needed for their subsistence; and class struggle, arguing that this exploitation, driven by the relentless pursuit of profit and increasing competition, would inevitably lead to increasing contradictions and crises within capitalism, culminating in a violent revolutionary overthrow of the capitalist by the proletariat. Following this revolution, they envisioned the establishment of a classless, communist society where the means of production were owned in common, leading to true human liberation and the end of historical exploitation, a society of abundance and equality. Their powerful ideas, while not immediately realized in Britain, profoundly influenced political movements, intellectual thought, and revolutionary ideologies across the globe, shaping the course of the 20th century and continuing to inform debates about economic justice, class, and social power. The profound and rapid changes in society, the new landscapes of industry, and the altered lives of its inhabitants also had a deep and immediate impact on art and literature, inspiring new styles, themes, and modes of expression as artists and writers sought to interpret and respond to this transformative era. The early phases of the Industrial Revolution largely coincided with the rise of transformative Romanticism. In the arts, Romantics often reacted strongly against the perceived dehumanization, ugliness, and mechanization of industrialization, celebrating instead the sublime beauty of unspoiled nature, the power of individual emotion, the untamed wilderness, and a nostalgic yearning for a more idyllic, pastoral, pre-industrial past. Poets like William Wordsworth and William Blake often mourned the loss of a pastoral ideal and critically viewed the encroachment of the dark satanic mills upon the English landscape and soul. Blake's famous poem, London, vividly depicts the grime, despair, and pervasive suffering of the industrial city, lamenting the mind-forged manacles that bound its inhabitants. Painters like J.M.W. Turner, while embracing the power of the New Age in works like Rain, Steam, and Speed, the Great Western Railway, often infused them with a sense of awe, even foreboding, depicting the raw, uncontrollable power of nature, alongside the imposing new machines. Other Romantic poets like Percy Bysshe Shelley and John Keats sought escape in the untrammeled natural world or classical myths, a stark contrast to the burgeoning industrial blight and social problems. The century progressed and the social problems of industrialization became undeniable. A distinct shift towards that's realism occurred in literature as writers sought to depict the world as it truly was, often exposing its harsh realities and social injustices with unflinching detail and moral purpose. Novelists like Charles Dickens became powerful, immensely popular chroniclers of their time. His works, such as Hard Times, directly critique industrial education, utilitarian philosophy, and the dehumanizing effects of factory life in the fictional Coketown, with its monotonous brick and smoke, while Oliver Twist exposes the squalor, crime, and grinding poverty of urban slums and the brutal workhouse system, shocking middle-class sensibilities. Elizabeth Gaskell, with novels like North and South, which vividly portrays the stark contrast and class conflict between the traditional agrarian South and the dynamic, smoke-filled industrial North, and Mary Barton, which deeply empathizes with and depicts the struggles, suffering, and moral dilemmas of Manchester's working class and the nascent labor movements, provided deeply empathetic and socially conscious narratives. The Bronte sisters, while often focusing on more personal psychological narratives, also often set their stories against the backdrop of industrializing Yorkshire, with its bleak landscapes and social strictures. George Eliot, Mary Ann Evans, another prominent realist, explored the social and moral complexities of provincial life undergoing change, often with industrial undercurrents. Their compelling, often serialized works brought the plight of the urban poor, the moral compromises of factory owners, and the complex social dynamics of industrialization to a wider, often middle-class reading audience, significantly contributing to public awareness and growing calls for social reform. Even visual arts, though perhaps slower to respond than literature, eventually began to incorporate industrial themes, from realistic landscape depictions of factories, canals, and railways, capturing their imposing presence, to the later impressionistic and modern art movements influenced by the changing urban landscape. The dynamic energy of the new age and the shifting human experience within it, moving beyond traditional subjects. The new complexities, the overwhelming scale of the machinery, and the profound need for new skills and specialized knowledge in an increasingly technological world also spurred important developments in FACM, education, and the systematic application of pārawanu science. While comprehensive, state-funded public education was slow to develop in Britain compared to some continental counterparts, institutions like mechanics institutes sprang up across industrial towns, often founded by benevolent industrialists, or reformers, or by workers themselves through subscription. These institutes offered technical education, evening classes, and public lectures to working men, demonstrating a growing recognition that specialized, practical, and scientific knowledge was crucial for navigating, contributing to, and even innovating within the new industrial economy, providing a pathway for self-improvement. Sunday schools, initially focused primarily on religious instruction, also provided crucial basic literacy to working-class children who otherwise had no access to formal schooling, allowing them to read and thus engage with broader ideas and public debates. Science, too, continued its advancements, moving beyond theoretical physics and providing the essential, practical, theoretical underpinnings for new technologies and significant improvements in public health and sanitation. Figures like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, through their development of germ theory in the mid-19th century, revolutionized understanding of disease, leading directly to public health engineering initiatives like modern sewage systems and clean water supply. The systematic application of scientific principles to industrial processes became increasingly vital, foreshadowing the even more profound scientific revolution that would drive the later stages of industrialization and connect academic research directly to industrial production, creating the modern research and development paradigm. Conversely, thinkers like Herbert Spencer developed social Darwinism, applying Darwinian concepts of natural selection to human society, arguing that competition and inequality were natural and beneficial, justifying the harsh realities of industrial capitalism and opposing state intervention. In essence, the Industrial Revolution was not merely a revolution of machines, of production methods, or of economic systems, but also a profound and far-reaching revolution of ideas. It forced societies to grapple with fundamental and enduring questions about the nature of wealth and poverty, the structure of social class, the proper role of government in regulating markets and protecting its citizens, the extent of individual liberty versus collective good, and the fundamental nature and ultimate cost of human progress. The intellectual and cultural responses of this era, whether through economic theories, social philosophies, or artistic expressions, laid the groundwork for many of the social and political debates that continue to shape our world today, from discussions about economic inequality and workers' rights to environmental responsibility and the ethical implications of technological advancement, demonstrating the enduring relevance of this period. By the mid-19th century, Great Britain stood as the undisputed Rio workshop of the world, the first truly industrialized nation, setting the global standard for industrial power and economic might. Its factories churned out goods that supplied burgeoning global markets. Its vast reserves of coal-fueled industries worldwide, and its extensive networks of railways and steamships provided the indispensable means of transport for both raw materials and finished products connecting distant corners of the empire and the world. Britain's early start, its immense and conveniently located natural resources, its relatively stable political system, its robust legal framework, and its pervasive entrepreneurial spirit gave it a massive, almost insurmountable, head start over other nations in the industrial race. British engineers, capitalists, and their innovative technologies and organizational models were sought after, admired, and meticulously emulated across the globe, driving a wave of industrial diffusion and shaping the course of global development, establishing a new international economic order. However, Britain's industrial dominance, while profound and lengthy, wouldn't last unchallenged forever. Other nations, witnessing Britain's immense wealth, geopolitical power, and technological prowess, soon sought to emulate its success and embark on their own paths to industrialization. The Boer Industrial Revolution began to spread, though not uniformly or simultaneously, to other parts of Europe and eventually to North America and Asia, creating a multipolar industrial world. This diffusion was often influenced by local conditions, existing infrastructure, and government policies, leading to diverse industrial pathways and varying degrees of success and social impact. This transfer of knowledge and technology often occurred through direct observation, the hiring of skilled British engineers, sometimes illicitly, the emigration of British workers with their expertise, the import of British machinery, and industrial espionage, despite early attempts by Britain to guard its industrial secrets. Belgium was one of the first countries to follow Britain's lead, often referred to as the second industrial nation, due to its rapid adoption of new technologies and factory systems. With its own rich coal and iron deposits, like those in the Wallonia region, a strong pre-existing tradition of mining and metallurgy, and a relatively dense population, it quickly adopted British technologies, often with the direct help of British engineers and entrepreneurs like John Cockerell, who established integrated ironworks and machine factories, effectively circumventing Britain's early laws restricting the export of machinery and skilled labor. Belgium rapidly became a major industrial power in its own right, particularly excelling in textiles, coal extraction, and iron production, playing a significant role in the industrialization of continental Europe and becoming a model for other emerging industrializers. France industrialized more slowly and with a somewhat different character compared to Britain. Its industrial growth was less concentrated and less explosive than Britain's, often more geographically dispersed, and it relied more heavily on hydroelectric power in some regions, particularly the Alps and Massif Central, rather than solely on coal given its natural advantages. Family businesses played a larger and more enduring role in industrial development, and traditional agricultural traditions remained strong for longer, acting as a brake on rapid rural-to-urban migration and maintaining a more balanced economy. France also faced more frequent political upheaval during this period, with a series of revolutions and regime changes, 1830, 1848, 1870, intermittently hampering sustained industrial growth and large-scale capital investment, contributing to a more measured pace of industrialization and a different industrial structure, often emphasizing luxury goods, fashion, and specialized crafts rather than mass-produced staples. Germany's industrialization began later than Britain's and France's, particularly accelerating rapidly after its political unification in 1871. But once it took hold, it was incredibly rapid, powerful, and uniquely scientifically driven. Germany possessed vast reserves of coal in the Ruhr Valley, Lorraine, and Silesia, and crucially, developed excellent scientific and technical education systems, notably its research universities and polytechnics, which fostered innovation, applied research, and a highly skilled technical workforce that linked industry directly to scientific discovery. The German state played a more active and guiding role in industrial development than in Britain, investing heavily in infrastructure, especially railways, promoting scientific research through state funding, and encouraging the formation of large integrated industrial cartels and corporations, like Krupp and Siemens, that dominated specific sectors. German industry quickly excelled not only in heavy industry, coal, iron, steel, particularly developing new processes like the Bessemer and open hearth furnaces for steel production, but also, and more significantly, in emerging science-based sectors like chemicals, synthetic dyes, pharmaceuticals, fertilizers, and electrical engineering, laying the robust foundation for its emergence as a major global economic and military power. By the end of the 19th century, aggressively challenging Britain's industrial supremacy. Across the Atlantic, the United States also industrialized rapidly, particularly after its devastating Civil War ended in 1865, which ironically freed up vast resources and labor and spurred a wave of national consolidation and investment. With seemingly limitless natural resources spanning a vast continent, coal, iron, oil, timber, a rapidly growing population fueled by massive immigration from Europe, and an expanding domestic market that was eventually unified by vast railway networks, the U.S. developed its own unique industrial strengths. It became a global leader in the development and practical application of mass production techniques and interchangeable parts, exemplified by figures like Eli Whitney in early arms manufacturing, the American System of Manufactures, and later, Henry Ford's revolutionary assembly line during the Second Industrial Revolution. The U.S. rapidly developed its extensive railway networks, spanning and transforming a vast continent, and built powerful manufacturing industries that would quickly propel it to become a global economic superpower, eventually surpassing Britain's output by the turn of the 20th century. Even Japan, far removed from the European core, embarked on a remarkable and deliberate path of industrialization during the Meiji Restoration, 1868 onwards. Consciously observing Western technological advancements and recognizing the critical importance of industrialization for national strength, modernization, and maintaining independence in the face of Western expansion and potential colonization, Japan underwent a deliberate state-led process of modernization and industrialization, heavily influenced by government initiatives and the systematic adoption of foreign expertise. It focused initially on textiles, with government-built model factories and carefully managed technology transfer, and then rapidly moved into heavy industry, shipbuilding, and modern armaments, building its own industrial base from the ground up, fostering large conglomerates known as zaibatsu. Its incredibly rapid rise from a feudal society to a significant industrial power demonstrated that industrialization was not limited to Western powers, but was a transferable model for national development and global competitiveness, albeit one with significant cultural and political adaptations and a unique emphasis on close state business cooperation and nationalistic goals. This widespread dissemination of industrialization across the globe marked the true beginning of a truly globalized economy and fundamentally altered the balance of world power, setting the stage for 20th century conflicts and alliances and establishing a hierarchical international system. Raw materials from one continent fed factories in another, and finished goods were shipped across vast oceans to distant markets, creating complex, interdependent global supply chains. The Industrial Revolution created intricate, often unequal, global systems leading to both unprecedented wealth creation and, in many cases, exacerbated existing inequalities between the newly industrialized and the non-industrialized nations, often contributing to new forms of colonialism, economic dependence, and intense geopolitical competition for resources, markets, and strategic advantage, leading to the scramble for Africa and further imperial expansion. The legacy of the Industrial Revolution is quite simply the very foundation of the modern world we inhabit, shaping every aspect of our lives, whether we recognize it or not, permeating our social structures, economic systems, and environmental challenges. It transformed every conceivable aspect of human existence, setting in motion forces that continue to shape our lives, our societies, and our planet today, often in profound and unexpected ways, creating both unprecedented opportunities and immense ongoing challenges. First, its economic transformation remains foundational. It gave birth to modern industrial capitalism, the factory system, mass production, and the consumer culture that defines so much of our daily lives and economic aspirations. It created unprecedented wealth on a global scale and fostered a truly interconnected global economy, fundamentally changing how goods are produced, distributed, and consumed, and creating ever-growing, often insatiable markets for products and services, leading to constant economic expansion, the pursuit of efficiency, and relentless innovation in business models. Second, its impact on urbanization and demography is still vividly visible in our landscapes. It led to the growth of massive, complex cities as the primary centers of human activity and a dramatic, often irreversible, shift in population from rural to urban areas across the world, a trend that continues globally today. It also contributed to sustained exponential global population growth through improved food supplies, and eventually significant advances in public health and sanitation that drastically reduced mortality rates and increased life expectancy, leading to modern population patterns and the demographic transition. Third, its drive for technological progress set a new accelerated trajectory for humanity that continues unabated. It laid the crucial foundation for continuous, accelerating technological innovation, proving the concept of applying scientific knowledge and engineering ingenuity to solve practical problems for profit and societal benefit. The steam engine, the factory system, and the railway were just the beginning, paving the way for further advancements. It directly led to the Second Industrial Revolution, roughly late 19th and early 20th century, with groundbreaking advancements in steel production, Bessemer process, open hearth furnaces, electricity generation and distribution, the chemical industry, synthetic dyes, fertilizers, pharmaceuticals, explosives, the internal combustion engine, mass communication, telegraph, telephone, radio, and the rise of truly large-scale, vertically integrated corporations and global brands. And arguably, it continues to inform and inspire our current technological advancements in the digital age, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology, demonstrating a relentless human drive to innovate, create, and master our environment, always seeking greater efficiency, productivity, and power, often with unforeseen consequences that require careful ethical consideration. Fourth, its profound social and political change. continues to echo in contemporary debates and struggles. It created entirely new social classes, the industrial bourgeoisie and the vast proletariat, and fueled deep-seated class conflict, spurring the rise of powerful labor movements, trade unions, and insistent demands for social and political reform, including greater democratic participation and economic justice. It forced governments to grapple with complex issues of public health, education, housing, worker welfare, and social justice, fundamentally altering the relationship between the state and its citizens and leading to the gradual development of early welfare states, modern labor laws aimed at protecting workers, and the expansion of democratic rights. The ongoing struggle for economic equality, social mobility, and human rights can be directly traced back to the divisions and injustices created and illuminated during this era, and its ideas continue to animate political discourse globally. Fifth, and perhaps most pressingly for our collective future, its environmental impact is undeniable, global, and increasingly critical. It marked the beginning of large-scale systematic environmental degradation on a global scale. The burning of vast quantities of fossil fuels, initially coal, then increasingly oil and natural gas, for energy led to unprecedented air and water pollution, contributing to acid rain, urban smog, the destruction of natural habitats, and, critically, the massive accumulating release of greenhouse gases that are now unequivocally driving global climate change, presenting an existential threat. It also led to the rapid depletion of natural resources as industries expanded and demanded more raw materials. Challenges we continue to grapple with on a global scale today, making the Industrial Revolution a crucial starting point for understanding our current ecological crisis and the imperative for sustainable development and responsible environmental stewardship. Finally, its impact on global power shifts irrevocably reshaped the world order. It cemented the dominance of Western industrialized nations for over a century, profoundly reshaping global geopolitics, trade patterns, and economic power dynamics, creating a clear hierarchy. It contributed significantly to the acceleration and intensification of colonialism and imperialism, as industrialized powers sought ever more raw materials for their ravenous factories and expanded captive markets for their manufactured goods, often at the brutal expense of non-industrialized regions and their populations, leading to widespread exploitation and leaving a complex legacy of global inequality, economic dependence, and historical grievances that still influence international relations and development patterns today. The rise of industrial powers fundamentally changed the nature of warfare, making it more destructive. The Industrial Revolution was not a finite event with a neat beginning and end. It was, and in many ways continues to be, a dynamic, ongoing process, a profound and continuous acceleration of change that set humanity on an entirely new and irreversible trajectory. It was undoubtedly a period of extraordinary innovation and progress, lifting millions out of subsistence poverty and leading to unparalleled material abundance and convenience for many, creating the foundations for modern living standards and aspirations. Yet it was also a period of immense human suffering, exploitation, and profound social disruption for countless others, leaving a complex and often painful legacy of inequality, environmental damage, and ethical dilemmas that we continue to confront as societies. It reminds us that progress is often a double-edged sword, bringing both immense benefits and profound, often unforeseen challenges that require continuous adaptation, critical ethical reflection, and collective action. Understanding this revolutionary period, its multifaceted origins, its intricate dynamics, and its far-reaching consequences is absolutely crucial for comprehending the forces that shaped our present and continue to influence our future. As we navigate new technological shifts, confront global challenges like climate change and inequality, and strive to build a more just and sustainable world for all, learning from the rich, complex, and often harsh lessons history offers to enlighten our path forward and avoid repeating past mistakes. The story of the Industrial Revolution is ultimately the story of how we became modern and how we are still grappling with its consequences. Thank you so much for joining me on this comprehensive and deeply detailed exploration of the Industrial Revolution. I truly hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and perhaps even a little inspiring in its depiction of human ingenuity and resilience in the face of monumental change. If you did, please take a moment to hit that like button, as it genuinely helps the channel reach a wider audience and encourages more people to engage with historical content and critical thinking. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing for more in-depth historical content and analysis. Your support truly means the world to me and allows me to keep researching, developing, and producing these detailed videos that I'm so passionate about, striving to bring you the highest quality historical explorations. And please, don't forget to share your thoughts on how your day is going and one future goal you have in the comments below. I love reading your contributions, hearing your diverse perspectives, and engaging with all of you in the community. Until next time, take care, stay curious, keep exploring the fascinating, intricate, and ever-relevant tapestry of our shared human past. And remember the profound lessons history offers for our future as we continue to shape the world, just as the Industrial Revolution shaped us.